Today is February 2nd of the year 2021. Welcome to the Reviving the Global Heart online practice. Joe Weston is not with us today. He is on retreat in the Netherlands. He sends his heartfelt wishes to all the people here, including our special guest today, Theodore Richards, who is sitting outside of Miami. So reviving the global heart, and I would like to introduce, I know him as Ted. You can find out more about him at theodorerichards.com. The formal introduction is Theodore Richards is a poet, novelist, and religious philosopher. He has received degrees from various institutions, including University of Chicago, Cal Institute of Integral Studies. He's authored numerous books, including Creatively Maladjusted, The Wisdom Education Movement Manifesto. His literary awards include the Independent Publisher Awards Gold Medal in Religion and Religious Fiction and the Nautilus Book Awards Gold Medal. He has worked with youth on the South Side of Chicago, the Bronx and Harlem, and in Oakland. He is the director and founder of the Chicago Wisdom Project and lives in Chicago with his wife and daughters, though he is not in Chicago right now. And I'm privileged to call Ted my friend and know him as somebody who is actively engaged in reviving the global heart. And when I talked to Ted last week, we were exploring what we were going to talk about, and we often talk about education. But this morning, what was on my heart was the topic of wildness. That reviving the global heart somehow feels like wildness would be a great thing to be involved in that revival. So I would like to start by reading a little bit of Ted's writing. Hey, Ted, are you used to people reading what you've written?
Yeah, actually, no problem.
All right.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, our alienation from the wild and textured world has relegated us to the two-dimensional. Lacking depth, we spend our time in front of screens, seeking after meaning and connection without touch, without awe, without wildness. A sterile, individualized spirituality has left our souls sterile. The great threat to humanity now is the sterility of soils and souls. One could argue that there is no greater spiritual project in today's world than the reclamation of the wild, a project paralleled by the ecological project to reclaim the wilderness. The two, the inner and the outer, the microcosm and the macrocosm, are inseparable. He talks about 5 ways he sees wildness touching us. And I'm going to skip down to a third. Wild spaces allow us to get in touch with our own wildness, and wildness is where creativity comes from. This creativity, evidenced as far back as the cave paintings, is what makes us human. Wildness teaches us the value of diversity. There is practical value in this. Without diversity, we lack the capacity to find new solutions. In an organism, a lack of genetic diversity can mean an inability to deal with new diseases. And in an ecosystem, a lack of biodiversity can mean death. Modern monoculture has put the planet at risk. We have no solutions other than the clearly unsustainable ideas of industrial capitalism. Finally, wildness is beautiful. This has value for its own sake. Indeed, valuing it all means letting go of the tyranny of utilitarianism that denies that things can have value without a practical use. So what then does a new spirituality of wildness look like? This, of course, is not for me or anyone else to prescribe, but I can say that it would involve being outside more than inside, that will involve the creative energies that wildness fosters, that it will involve new and also very old ways of growing food, that it will recognize our interconnectedness as opposed to our individualism. In the end, a spirituality of wildness will help us to see that it is not only the church or the temple that's sacred, it all is. Thank you, Ted, for being such a gifted writer and for joining us today from your outside space.
Thank
And
you. Where was that from? Can you remind me where that was from?
reimagining.
Oh, it's from the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was, but then I wasn't sure.
See, the guy's written so many books, he can't even keep his quotes
I
straight.
thought I've written articles that are similar to that, so I was wondering if you pulled it from an article.
So I'm going to throw this to you. Reviving the global heart and wildness, what comes to you?
You know, I did want to say that, you mentioned how we often talk about education, right? You thought, well, it's rather than education, we're going to focus on wildness a little bit. And I think those are actually the same subject, you know? So this year I have three children, and two of whom are being, the two youngest, or 5 and 7, are being homeschooled. And so wildness is a major theme in my house, I would say, with my little kids around. And so wildness is like one of the ways that we learn. We encounter the world through our wildness. So we create, just as we're talking about how we sort of like, we can pave over the world to keep it more controllable. We do the same thing in a classroom with a child or in a home with a child. It's much easier to sit your child in front of the TV. You just sort of turn them off for a while and they're more controllable. And we create all kinds of systems of control in classrooms to keep our children subdued and keep them from kind of exploring and causing problems. We're scared of wild things and wild spaces, and for good reason, right? I mean, wilderness can be scary. Wildness can be scary. But that's kind of where all the creativity comes from, and that's where all the joy comes from. I think that our civilization largely rests on kind of various means of controlling and subduing that wildness, both beyond ourselves and within ourselves. And one of the things I think we really require right now is a reclamation of our own wild spirits, along with a recognition that the wilderness and the wild spaces on the planet are fundamental to all of our survival.
So what about the people who say things would get out of control if we allowed our own wildness to burst forth?
Yeah, I mean, there is some balance is important in all things, I think, right? So, I can say that some amount of, and human culture has always rested upon what we do. We create kind of controlled spaces. We create stories that put our worlds together to make sense, and we create community by creating meaning that is a little less wild than the chaos beyond our community, beyond our culture. That's kind of how human beings function. And so there is value in control and value in order and structure. So we kind of a balance between the two, I think. And I would suggest that perhaps the pendulum has swung too far toward order and toward control in our civilization. And I think like in ways in which, and I think kind of this consumer capitalism really sort of like has spiraled out of control in that way. Insofar as if we think about how even over the last 10 years, how through the kind of like algorithms that control our daily lives, through the internet, through social media, how our engagement with the planet is so often mediated by smart technology. And what that really does is it reduces us to something that's quantifiable, We become both consumers and products exclusively in that. I mean, I like to think about a social media profile, like generally speaking, you know, I mean, like I can promise you that the image in my social media profile is far more palatable than the image that I present to my family, like throughout the day, right? So that's sort of normal. I mean, you know, but the problem is that our engagement is almost exclusively in these kind of mediated two-dimensional spaces. We've lost the kind of texture of the world. We've lost its depth and diversity, and we've lost its messiness. And I think that messiness, like when we were talking about that the other day, Todd, the word messiness.
Yeah.
And I think like losing the sense of the world as a messy place, an unpredictable place. First of all, just for its own sake, we lose some of the beauty in the world. And we lose the ability to really experience the world in its fullness and its depth, you know. And that's hard, you know what I mean? It's like that's not always easy. It's not always easy. So the answer to someone who would question that would be, yeah, it may very well be horrible for you for a while if things are messy and unpredictable. That's not. But the solution of like hyper control, I think, is leading us on a path of destruction, both internally and externally.
So I know that one of the ways that we've talked about cultivating wildness is to go out into the wildness, the wilderness. But I'm curious as to what are other ways that you or we can cultivate wildness in our hearts?
What immediately comes to mind, and this is not as available to everyone as it is to me. What immediately comes to mind is our children, because children are inherently wild, and that's kind of, I think, why we spend so much time in education trying to sort of like rein them in and control them, right? So I think one thing I'd encourage us to do is to help create spaces for our young people to be wild and creative in those spaces, because we'll learn from them. Not just babies like I have, but like even young adults, older, or older children like me and you, just to find spaces to be wild and creative. I think there's a real link between wildness and creativity. I'd put those sort of in the same categories, and I think that finding ways to be creative and really explore is super important. Someone was sharing me with an academic paper he wrote yesterday, and he was asking, he was sort of like apologizing for it up front and saying, well, it's a little experimental and I'm not sure about it. And I said, look, that's the whole point of being in school and writing an academic paper, even in graduate school. The point is, this is the space to like try ideas out. So we can be creative and wild with ideas too. And we have to find spaces in which we can share ideas that might be a little bit wrong or might be a little bit over the top, but we can experiment with those ideas. And that's this kind of like thing about diversity I was trying to say, is that a diversity of perspectives and ideas is super important. It's super important. I think we have a kind of tendency toward monoculture right now that's really hindering our ability to think of creative solutions to problems.
So you've written about the apocalypse, which Ted taught me that the meaning of the word apocalypse is an unveiling. And so it's not necessarily the literal end of the world, it's the end of the world as we know it. The veil is being lifted. And for the need to let old stories fall away and new stories come through. And I'm just wondering, the few minutes we have left, what do you see as these new stories? What is the texture? What is the wildness of these new stories?
Yeah. I mean, historically, the apocalyptic tradition arose out of this experience of the world coming to an end because the stories and the symbols that had put the world together, in this particular case, it's for the Israelite people, that had put their world together, through which they'd understood their place and meaning in the world, that was falling away. So the only solution that could be imagined was an entirely new world. So what we're really talking about is the end of a worldview rather than the end of a world. And this, I think, is a similar moment on a global level. On a global level. I mean, I could come up with many, many different ways that I think we need to experience this. I would suggest that the story we need now is less about us as individuals. We've tried that through capitalism the last 500 years. We've tried to think of ourselves as radically independent. And what that has done is it's led us on a path of destruction. I would suggest that we need to think of ourselves as more interdependent. And we need to think of a story that binds us on a global level. I don't think we have that. We've not evolved to think globally. We've evolved to think in small groups of people. And that's fine and normal. But we're at a moment where we have to think kind of globally about what's going on. And I think the story that we derive our identity from kind of the symbols of consumer capitalism, what we can buy, what we can sell. I think we have to think of ourselves as human beings, just as we have to look at the planet, we have to look at ourselves as human beings as somewhat having more of what I like to say is just being more textured, more messy, more deep, as opposed to just sort of two-dimensional algorithms, you know, because that's really the story we're being given, is that we derive our meaning from like kind of like these really shallow set of symbols we can put on a social media platform. But I think re-embracing that kind of messiness of who we are is really helpful. So I'll leave it there because I think we don't want to. That's a long discussion, but I think, and I also want to say like just real quick that I think that these new stories, they don't come from, you know, talking heads and ivory towers. I think we have to remember that there are people outside of those spaces, like, you know, Wall Street and, you know, fancy universities, who have a lot to say about their world. And I think we have to learn listening and humility in that process.
Well, speaking of listening, Tori is going to lead us in a practice and tuning our listening to the moment. And Ted, if you stick around, we'll have time for a little debrief and discussion afterwards.
Wonderful. Thanks, Todd. Thank you, Ted. Beautiful ponderings. So moving into our practice, go ahead and close your eyes. And as you close your eyes for a moment, you know, we've been looking at this, like Ted mentioned, this two-dimensional screen at the moment. But as we move into our practice, let's imagine in your mind's eye that we're all in a circle. And see how much texture and 3D you can bring to the circle that we're sitting in, each individual. And bringing forth, or just bringing into our meditation today, a piece of you that's wild. So we're sitting in circle, all bringing forth a piece of us that's wild, that connects to the wild. And whatever that looks for you. Feeling your connection point below you, feeling your seat on the chair or the ground, the surface below you. Noticing the surface below you is supported by then a floor, a surface below the chair, and that surface ultimately is embedded into a foundation and the soil of the earth. So for a moment in our circle, bringing forth a piece of our wild, connecting with directly with the earth as part of nature. and allowing yourself to be held in this moment. Your spine is gently lengthened, but not rigid. And you're aware of gravity, this powerful yet invisible force that keeps us connected, that holds us to the earth. And see in this moment how much you can really allow yourself to be held by gravity, to be held by the earth. Bringing your awareness to your center, that alive, energetic, real place, a few finger widths below your navel, a third of the way into your body. What is present for you in this moment there? From your center, becoming aware of your physical body. Becoming aware of sensation, temperature. Maybe the wild part is in your physicality, noticing that. Maybe there's a part of you that's dancing or expressing. From your center, becoming aware of your emotions in this moment. What emotions are most present for you right now? And are there any emotions that are more wild that need to have a voice or have a presence? All the emotions are welcome. From your center, becoming aware of your thoughts. How are your thoughts in this moment? And now bringing awareness to your heart space. That space in the middle of your chest. Imagining the color of emerald green in the center of your chest and this powerful and measurable magnetic field that emanates from your heart in all directions. And from your center and from your heart, becoming aware of that part of you that connects to something larger, that connects to something larger than yourself. And simply noticing and becoming aware of that connection. Perhaps asking yourself in this moment, how connected do I feel to something larger? Whatever that is for you. Without a judgment, just a simple noticing, listening. And from your center and from your heart, now taking that awareness out to your surroundings. Becoming aware of your surroundings above you, below you, behind you. How does it feel to connect to your surroundings from your center and from your heart? How are you affecting your surroundings in this moment? How are your surroundings affecting you? So having a deepening awareness of yourself in your surroundings, taking a deep breath in from your heart and from your center. Deep breath in through your nose, expanding through your belly, and slowly exhaling out through your mouth. As we continue to sit in circle, having a deeper awareness of ourself and our surroundings from your center and from your heart, now connecting to the center and the hearts of the other human beings on this call in this moment. As we sit in circle and just imagine you're connected to yourself and now you connect out to each other. Remembering our interconnectedness, our interdependence. From your center and from your heart, expanding this awareness outward now to all humans, to all human beings in this moment, starting with those that you would consider loved ones. From your center and from your heart, connecting to those people you would consider loved ones. From your center and from your heart now, becoming aware of those and connecting with those people that you would consider to be strangers. Maybe somebody on this call, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone on TV, someone you pass in the car. The young boy in Zimbabwe, the pregnant woman in Thailand, in this moment. And from your center and from your heart, now connecting with those that you would consider to be adversaries. Keeping awareness of yourself, your heart, just noticing as you connect with those people that you would consider to be adversaries. You're not advocating that you have to agree with them or share their views or even like them, but can we connect from our center and from our heart, from a place of humanity and possibility? Taking a deep breath in from our center and from our heart, in through the nose, out through your mouth slowly. From your center and from your heart, coming back, connecting with the people on this call. Taking a moment as we connect, and maybe if you'd like, picking a specific person just for as we're sitting in circle, and you pick a specific person on this call to connect with from your center and your heart. And in your mind's eye, opening your eyes and connecting with that person directly. Seeing them for exactly who they are without judgment, without assumption. And taking a moment to honor and bow deeply to the wildness within them. Thank you for bringing that part of you. Taking a deep breath in through your nose, continuing to connect in through the nose, out through your mouth, connecting from your center, from your heart, from your eyes. In your mind's eye and through your eyes or gesture that feels right for you, expressing gratitude to that person. And allowing your eyes to close again as you come back inward. Connecting to your center and your heart. And taking a moment to do a quick assessment of the effects of your practice. How do you feel in this moment physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually? Taking one last deep breath in together from your center and from your heart, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Allowing your eyes to gently flutter open. Coming back into your space, maybe gazing around your space for a moment. Maybe stretching your body, rolling your shoulders. Taking a big sigh.
Thank you, Tori.
Mm.
So we have about 10 minutes left for reflections either on the practice or what Ted shared, wildness in the apocalypse.
Well, I think we can agree that the apocalypse is not going to be televised. So
It's not going to be what, Jeff? I missed that.
Televised.
televised. The apocalypse will not be televised. So I can feel the word wild moving in me and interest in a kind of oscillation, like wild meaning kind of dramatic, right? A wild party. And then I was sitting there and I was thinking, okay, or reflecting, where in my current life do I experience wild in the form of the presence of the wilderness? And I realized it's this, we've got a neighborhood rabbit. I live in the city. And so there's this rabbit that's in the front yard about once a week in the evening, pretty much regardless of weather. And so that's another form of wild, right? That the wild meaning not the cultured, not the human culture, So I was just in the meditation, I could feel this oscillation between wild in the sense of the raw, the kind of and then the wild, which is that little rabbit, who's actually wild in the midst of all of us being human culture critters. So.
Love that. Thank you, Jeff.
My thoughts went this morning to how patriarchal culture has handcuffed wildness, not just within women, but men as well. But my own personal work is around women's embodiment of the divine. And so that's where my thoughts are this morning, because I'm leading a group tonight, and to help younger women find places of wildness within themselves and within their situations. How do they do that? How it's shamed, how it's manipulated. So that's where my thoughts went this morning.
Have you explored the Epic of Gilgamesh at all?
Not in the context of this, no.
So it's like a story about this man, essentially, who's part God and part man, who's attempting to build a wall around the city. And it's a story about his encounter with, that's Gilgamesh, with Enkidu, who's a wild man who lives in the forest among the animals. And he learns in part from Enkidu how to be an actual human, because he's not quite human. He thinks he's a god. He learns that kind of wild aspect of what it really means to be a human. But unfortunately, Enkidu learns from Gilgamesh how to build empires and build walls. And they begin to cut down the forest and really have an encounter with the goddess. And it's Gilgamesh's rejection of the goddess that leaves his friend Enkidu to die. Interestingly, Enkidu dies from disease, much like the disease that we're encountering in the world today, brought about by our encroachment upon and destruction of natural spaces. But I bring all that up to say is Gilgamesh is really a story about this sort of transition into patriarchal culture, into empire building. And I think that's a really great point you bring about patriarchy and its role in kind of suppressing that wildness, in all of us.
I found in bringing wildness and wilderness into the meditation, actually some really deep serenity. I've been in places like the Boundary Waters National Canoe Forest, where it is just quiet and star-filled. And I think Tori's meditation, that's where I landed, just sort of in this kind of pool of deep peace and serenity for this moment. So thank you both.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Ev.
When you were speaking, Ted, Theodore, about where do we find the wild, and in our kids, and I thought, yeah, in my own wild child for sure. And the thinking and the like letting go of what I'm supposed to be in my mind, which I think of as a masculine structure, and falling into the open wildness of my feminine feels like freedom. And so there's that remembering, and during the meditation, I felt my body more well beyond when we went beyond the physical body and when we were in the opening to the space around us and connection. There was a thrum in my body's energy system that was more prevalent than usual. So thanks for the invitation into the wild. It was delicious.
Thank you, Shelley. Got time for one more. Mika?
Yes, maybe I'm the last. I will. There are so many words, and I only want to laugh about myself, about all the stories, and wild is in it when I laugh at myself and other things what happened when I can smile and laugh and so I'm not that serious. So that's my wild part today. I hope you enjoy it the whole day. For us, but with us is it already evening. You have the whole day. So smile at yourself and maybe it's going to be wild.
That, Mika, that's a great way to close, especially with the wolves right behind you. They're not laughing. So you laughing with the wolves behind you, that whole little scene feels pretty wild to me. Tori, can you send us off with the dedication?
Absolutely. I'm present. I just want to point out it is wild and it's also super beautiful. Ted, Theodore, the lighting that is hitting your head right now and blazing right to you and circling you, like it's wild and magical. And I just have to bring that in. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for your wisdom and your sharing and your generosity. And bowing inward for a moment and dedicating this practice and this allowing this wild to move through us and see what emerges for the day, that we may better come into, yes, laughing at ourselves, serving. May we dive deeper into our wild to enliven ourselves and also to recognize and honor and see the wild in others that we touch, in our communities, in our planet. Deep bow to each of you. Have a beautiful wild day, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Mwah. Aloha.
Aloha.